So, welcome back to this little video series. Um, Basically, we discussed the components, the individual components in the last episode or in the first episode, and now we are going to move on to actually building this PC. Well, I guess the first thing. As you can see, we have deployed our anti-static covering, basically. Normally we would connect this here, which is the anti-static wristband. But unfortunately, if I connect this one here and ground myself, I won't be able to move around, and I won't be able to get all the components in the view here. So, well, we have to do this without this. But, nonetheless, we're going to do something about static electricity by wearing these rubberized cloths, working cloths. That should at least minimize the possibility of discharge of electricity into the components. So, the first thing we do is we start with the motherboard. Why do we start with the motherboard? Because we want to plug in the CPU and the RAM, both of which is the easiest way to do by placing it on a flat ground and plugging the components in. If you do this in the PC, it can be a little bit tricky depending on where the PC sits or where the motherboard in the case sits. So in this case, we are going to do this outside of the case and then place it on the side until we are finished with it. So let me get something to put it on. So place it here, put this to the side. So I guess let's start with the biggest thing, which is first let's get this out of the frame. This is the back I/O plate. It's not absolutely necessary, but it helps preventing getting dust in the PC, and it looks a lot better with this one installed, but that's something we will do later on. Yeah, why not? Let's start with the CPU. So, remove this. Get this one. Get this out of the way. Okay, perfect. As you saw, and as you probably saw in the unboxing, there is a cooler included with this processor, but we are not going to use that one. We have a water cooling AIO cooler, which means it's totally integrated, so you don't have to do any connecting pipes and so on. So this is going to make it a lot easier for us to install water cooling, and water cooling it's not always better than air cooling, obviously. There are some cases where air cooling is preferable, but in a setup like this with this many cores, with the expected workload, especially with the continued workload, it might be advisable to use water cooling, especially because they have dropped in price quite a bit. So, when removing the CPU, make sure that you don't touch anything on the bottom of the CPU. And as you saw here, you need to, in this case, it's an AMD processor, so there is this small thing here, which basically moves this plastic around, which locks the processor into the socket. Basically, this lever is kind of attached here, so it moves this one in front and locks the processor in. Make sure you don't get any water, dirt or debris on these thingies here, on these contact points. Okay. Very well. So let's see where the knob is. Okay, as you can see here, the CPU in this case has a lot of pins on the bottom. You really need to make sure that none of these pins get bent, because it's basically going to be almost over for the CPU if one of those pins breaks. Let's put it in. That looks about right. In case you aren't sure how to install the processor, sometimes it's a little bit difficult, and I will explain why in a moment. You can always consult the user manual. So let's see here, it says 1.8 for the processor. Right. That's written basically how to align the processor. As you can see here, I will remove the processor again with utmost care. There's a little golden triangle on the upper right corner from your perspective. And as you can see here in the manual, it says this thing here, so this, and then this corner, so the golden corner here needs to align with this corner, which is this one. It has some kind of a little bit of labeling here. So we align these two and very carefully drop it in. And after dropping it in, you need to push down this lever and lock it in place here. This should be possible without any major force basically. Don't just ram it in there, you will damage the processor otherwise. Locking also should be without much pressure. Let's get the next thing. This is here. So as we can see now, the processor isn't moving around anymore, so should be locked in place where it's supposed to be. Okay. The next thing we are going to install is the RAM, which in this case is the Corsair LPX DDR4 RAM sticks. Nothing too fancy, nothing too special. To do this, this motherboard only has on one side these little nips here, which you have to push to the side. Sometimes motherboards have it on both sides, in this case it's only on one side. The good thing is, with these RAM sticks, you can't really install them, well, basically in the wrong way. It's not easy to install them in any wrong way, because there is this key here, which corresponds to one of these knobs here in one of these sockets. If you have done everything right, it will basically get in without much force. If you misalign this knob, for example, if you do something like this, it won't fit in there. So it basically these golden pins on the bottom won't sink into the socket, and that way you easily can identify that you have done something wrong. So this is right, okay. And the last one. Okay, perfect. So let's get this all out of the way here. And into some corner. And as you have seen, perhaps you have seen it, these nips here on the side they basically grab the RAM here on the side. If you want to remove the RAMs later on, you need to get this one and push it down, and then the RAM will spring up from one side and you can then get it out of there. Okay, and the last thing we have to add here would be our SSD. Of course, we are using an NVMe SSD with an M.2 here, with an M.2 connector. We need to install it. Well, we can install it later on, but in this case it's easier to install it right about now. As you can see, we have two M.2 slots. They should be labeled as 1 and 2. Usually you want to use the slot number 1 right here. This is M.2_1, and this then should be M.2_2, yes. So the upper one is the number 1. Okay. So there are these standoff screws here. Let's see whether we have to get a standoff. Right. So let's get the motherboard packaging here. That's the right things. And there are the standoffs for the two M.2 drives. Let's get a screwdriver. Okay, that one should be good enough. Okay. Good. Sorry. The important thing here is the SSDs come in different sizes in terms of length. The width is standardized and the lengths are also standardized, but there are different ones. And in this case, we need to go with this one here. Okay, looks good. And again, the SSD only goes in one way because of this keyhole here. You need to stick it in and then push it down. And while pushing it down, you need to screw it in. So get your screwdriver and let's screw it in. Okay, don't go crazy on the screws. They may break otherwise, or they may break your components. So let's place this in here, get it off to the side. And that's everything that the motherboard requires for now. So one important thing here is we need to get the water cooling from the back here. Let's move this a little bit to the side. Not because we are going to install it yet, but because we need to look at how it is installed. There should be a manual here, right? So somewhere here, right, exactly, that's what I wanted to know. As you can see here, because we are using an AMD processor, it comes with these two hooks here, basically, where we would normally put in one side of the hook and then tighten it down the other way. Some coolers, like this one, require you to unscrew these here. and replace it with one of their own backplates, basically, with one of their own plates and well, fixtures. In this case, we have to do that because, as you can see here in the quick start guide, it mentions here for the AMD processors, please remove these standoffs. And there should be this accessory pack, which we'll need because we'll need to install our own assembly here. Right. Let's get this one in the middle. As a side note, you should only use hand powered tools, because you can easily damage one of these screws, which eventually may damage your motherboard or other components. For the PC case, using electric tools is no problem, but for these things here, I am not going to use any, and preferably you shouldn't use one either. It's just too easy to damage something. So this one out. Okay. This one out as well. Come on. You should also be very, very cautious about screwing anything here, because well, there are a lot of small components, and if you destroy one, it's pretty much over in most cases. So this one here is fortunately labeled AM4, and it corresponds to the screws here used in the picture. So we're going to use them, because again, this is an AMD processor and it uses the AM4 socket. This is very important to figure out before you buy the PC components, that all of your things are actually going to be compatible with one another. Otherwise, you may end up not being able to assemble your PC properly, which would suck. Okay. This one doesn't want to cooperate. Okay. And the last one. No, this one doesn't really want to come and get in. Okay, let's see what are the threats of damage here. Doesn't seem to be the case. Okay. For some reason this one isn't really going to get in there. Well, let's try it again with the original screw here. It goes in perfectly. And for some reason this one isn't really going to fit. Isn't going to play nice with us. Come on. Okay, I guess this one doesn't really want to go in. The good thing is, we are going to make a cut anyway here, because this is the first part of the assembly. The next part is going to be us installing the assembled motherboard here into the case, and basically do the rudimentary wiring, so installing the graphics card, installing the water cooling. And the last part is going to be focused around how to route all the cables around and where to put them. So we are going to make this, well, perhaps we can squish it into a 2-part series, perhaps in a 3-part series. But let's make a break here. For now, I will figure out how to install this last standoff here. And then we will be back with episode 2 of this Let's Build. Basically episode, well, 3 of this entire series of videos. So until then.